6 months after the start of the rebellion, von Trotha landed in southwest Africa. He immediately met with Governor Leutwein and formally took over command. But at their meeting, Leutwein again appealed for negotiations to be resumed with the Herero. And this would have been the normal strategy in a colonial war. But the hysteria in Berlin meant that this no longer was a colonial war.
Von Trotha is not there to negotiate. For von Trotha, negotiation is a sign of weakness. For von Trotha, negotiation would be a shame to German honor, to German militarism. There is only one solution, the destruction of the Herero. Unfortunately for the Herero, they did not see that the rules of the game, as it were, had changed.
Yet the rebellion that von Trotha had come to crush was essentially over. After the initial outburst of violence, the Herero had changed their tactics. After twice fighting the German garrison to a stalemate, the Herero had started to avoid all contact with the Germans. The entire people had instead moved as far away from the German settlements as they could get. They gathered at the last big waterhole before the Kalahari Desert, the great plateau of Waterberg, Water Mountain. There they waited, hoping for negotiations, but they never came.
I think the Hereros would have considered the war over by spring 1904, because the way wars were usually fought in Namibia was there was battles and then that was it. It was over, you settle it and you negotiate terms, and that's the end of that. The Hereros had proved their point. Don't take all our land, treat us as humans, and we'll let that be that. Because they were at the point where they could have attacked Windhoek and the main stations, but decided not to. They backed off, they proved their point. So I think that from the Herero point of view, they were very clear on what had happened. Now the German side of the issue is completely different.
What the Herero at the Waterberg could not possibly have known was that instead of planning negotiations, the Germans were assembling a colonial army unlike any other. Week after week in the late summer of 1904, hundreds of soldiers were sent from Germany, along with huge supplies of the latest weapons and artillery. One of the soldiers of this new army, the young Lieutenant Ritter von Epp, wrote letters to his family while on his way to Namibia. They reveal the extent to which some in the army had come to see the war as a crusade for Lebensraum.
This world is being redistributed. With time, we will inevitably need more space, and only by the sword will we be able to get it. This is a matter for our generation, and for our existence.
Only when he was convinced that he had acquired overwhelming military might did General von Trotha order his army out of their bases and head for the Waterberg. On the morning of the 11th of August 1904, the German cannons and machine guns began to fire on the Herero. General von Trotha's battle plan was, as he said in his own words, to encircle and annihilate the Herero with a simultaneous blow. But these plans were not what they seemed. Von Trotha had left one side of the encirclement weaker, knowing that when they were defeated, the Herero would have to retreat through this gap in the German line. This would force them to escape eastwards. And to the east lay the desert that the Herero called the Omahake, but we know as the Kalahari. By the end of the battle, this was exactly what was happening. The Germans pursued the defeated Herero. For week after week in the summer of 1904, they were pushed deeper and deeper into the Omahake Desert. Once the Herero had been forced past the last waterholes, the Germans built a 200-mile-long line of guard posts to seal them in the desert. Now trapped, thousands began to die of thirst and starvation. But finally, to seal the fate of the Herero, von Trotha did something unprecedented in colonial history.
The history of European rule in late 19th and early 20th century Africa is unbelievably brutal. But what sets the genocide apart of the Herero in German Southwest Africa is General von Trotha's explicitly articulated Vernichtungsbefehl, the annihilation order, in which he committed to paper his plan to destroy the Herero people.
On the 1st of October, 2 months after the Battle of Waterberg, von Trotha and a group of German soldiers reached the waterhole of Asombo Windimbe. The next morning, von Trotha read out a proclamation to his troops.
I, the great general of the German soldiers, send this letter to the Herero people. Within the German borders, every Herero, with or without a gun, will be shot. I will no longer accept women and children.
The important thing about Asombo Windimbe is the putting down into writing an official sanctioning of genocide. Why did this take place? I think that the situation had reached an extent where the German military believed that this was perfectly acceptable. They did not see that this was possibly controversial.
The Herero people must leave the land. If they do not do this, I will force them with the cannon. These are my words to the Herero people, the great general of the mighty Kaiser.
The thousands of starving Herero in the Omahake now seemingly had no hope. But in Berlin, the news of von Trotha's extermination order was a shock. The army and its supporters in the Reichstag had badly misjudged the changeable mood of the German people.
When news of the brutality with which Trotha and his troops are putting down the uprising reaches Germany, there are huge and radical protests, above all in the Reichstag, above all among the Centre Party. On this issue, they are radically opposed to the actual policies being conducted. And there are also newspaper articles. It's a national scandal, if you like.
Despite the scandal, the Kaiser refused to order von Trotha to rescind his extermination order. For 2 further months the Hereros were hunted down in the Omahake, until finally the government forced the Kaiser's hand. On the morning of the 9th of December, a telegram was sent ordering von Trotha to accept the surrender of the Herero.